So, because witchcraft isn't considered a religion, it's considered part of nature, you can align yourself with anything. I have seen, and you can look it up on TikTok, like if you just look up Christian witch, there are women who will still have their altar and practice witchcraft and dedicate their altar to Jesus. You can dedicate it to nature. So instead of having a small statue of Jesus or Satan or Aphrodite or whatever, you could have a jar of dirt.
Revelation 12:11. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives, even unto death.
The things that have been inflicted onto me, the things that I've inflicted onto myself, the Lord healed me completely.
All things, all beings submit to him. I could speak the name of Jesus and that evil would leave.
All I could feel was a peace and him say, "Not yet, daughter."
I called his name, and within a second, my breathing was restored and I could breathe normally again. I could not believe it.
And I saw Jesus interceding for me. And he said to me, "I've been protecting you from things you never even knew about."
Martyria. Episode 32. Zhané's Martyria. No Foothold and the Eclectic Witch.
Honestly, I think I got baptized by chance. I know that there was some kind of a thought process in older generations where if you get baptized, that's pretty much your like get out of jail free card, basically. And so I got baptized when I was 8, but my family was not super religious at all. I mean, which is crazy because my mom was raised Catholic, and for a little while, when my mom was married, we were going to a Catholic church regularly, but then outside of church, there was no talk about faith. I don't think our household had a Bible, and I was exposed to everything worldly. So it was almost kind of like that surface level, that lukewarm Christianity that you hear about as you do get into your faith and hear about kind of like what it means to be cold, lukewarm, hot Christian. My family was definitely lukewarm.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's interesting, though, that there are a lot of families, I think, that are like that, though, where they are, we'll say more on the lukewarm side, like you're saying, but demand that their children are baptized or, that sort of thing. It's so interesting to me. It's like, I know this is important, so I do it, but then I just kind of leave it at the church. You know what I mean? So it's just very interesting. So is that basically most of your childhood was kind of spent that way? I know you'd mentioned that your parents had divorced at some point, but like you were not necessarily raised Catholic. You were just kind of raised to be in a little bit of everything, I suppose, or just whatever happened to show up on the TV or whatever, whatever books you read or that sort of thing, I guess.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I was definitely allowed to question everything without having that foundational piece of, like be curious and learn about things, but come back to Christ. I didn't have that. So I was baptized, but if I talked about being interested in Buddhism, I was allowed to free rein that. If I thought that I was, and kids will joke about this. Kids will start wearing Halloween costumes with witches, and I was not stopped from any of it.
Gotcha. So it was very much a you test the waters, you see what's safe, and you kind of go from there. Were your parents, or if it was just your mom who raised you, either way, were they ever did they ever rein you in at any point when you were exploring?
Oh, well, not really, but that's also because we didn't have that religious foundation was pretty much when I was smaller. So when I graduated high school and started getting into my college years, that's when everything like supernatural started to ramp up for me. But I didn't have any kind of a foothold or any kind of a reference or anyone to really bring me back in, except for, and this is why I think that I was definitely being watched over, because I know that a lot of people will give testimony that they weren't even looking for God or they didn't even know really about God, but they could just tell after they, after they got into their faith and came home, so to speak, that they realized that he was watching over them. And I definitely understand that now. But really the only person who was, I think, was God. And that's why I think I
Hmm.
never strayed when I was a child. I definitely hit a rebellious peak where I specifically went away from him. But when I was growing up and I still had that innocence and I didn't really know what I was doing or what I was looking at, I feel like he definitely stepped in.
Hmm. Yeah, I keep getting this kind of like thought in my head of like, you have like a life preserver and like a rope, and like you can go out into the water a certain distance, but at
Hmm.
some point, you want to get pulled back in, and
Yeah.
that reminds me a lot of like that foothold that you're talking about. Like it's a good thing to explore from a place of assurity, having that foundation like you're talking about. I think it's a good thing. I would welcome my kids if they ask me questions about any of those things to say, well, let's look into those things together. Let's do that, but let's come from a place of dad has wisdom that he's happy to share with you.
Hmm.
But also I don't want you to feel like you can't ask me about things that I don't agree with or I don't follow or ascribe to or whatever. But yeah, no, but it's a dangerous thing though to realize when you're ready to get pulled back in that there is no rope and you're just floating, and who knows where that will lead you to. And I think that that's the interesting thing about that is there are a lot of kids that I think are raised that same sort of way where it's like, they'll figure it out on their own. Kids are
Hmm.
smart, they're resilient, they'll, that sort of thing. But um walking into I guess we'll go to what you had said kind of during your college years, you had definitely strayed from from some of the shallower waters into something a little bit deeper, I think.
Yes, definitely, 100%. And I posted about it, but for about 10 years. So I graduated in 2013. I had a small stint that I didn't mention where I felt kind of a minute conviction um, into religion, like Christianity. And the person that I was dating at the time, um, he was not committed to the lifestyle at all. But we moved in together and he came to me one day and was like, hey, I had these meetings before we lived together. So I'm going to have a couple people over while we're home this Saturday. And they were Jehovah's Witnesses. That did not work out for me at all.
Hmm.
But um, for a little bit there, it felt like I was maybe into something. Um, when I was with them for those 2 or so years, was when I did start to actually crack open the Bible. So I am thankful for that. That was part of the journey for a reason. Fell in love with the book of Job. We love some Job. But after that, something happened that didn't, I had to leave. And so basically, what had happened was I was at the grocery store with my grandmother, and one of the Jehovah's Witnesses worked at the store that we were at, and we were at checkout, and she was a slightly older woman with a really thick Jamaican accent. And so my grandmother, who's a little bit hard of hearing, couldn't understand what she was saying, but she looked my grandma in the face and told her that when the reckoning comes, my grandmother will never see me again, but she will. So I knew then that it didn't feel right, and I left that. And
Hmm.
that was the little rebellious little nudge that I got a bee in my bonnet about that pushed me into witchcraft. And I had TikTok had that whole witch talk thing blowing up at the time, so I
Hmm.
just fell right into it just immediately. And there's so much for you to do with it. It's actually scary. And so I started off small because what they teach you and what you can find online, which is the other terrible thing about it, is that there's no book. I mean, there's tons of books on it, but there's no solid book for you to go to. So you can just spiral as far as your little heart desires because you can use information that is solely on a Google search or somebody else's blog about spells that they did. And you can use that as your reference point and have no idea what you are inviting in. None
Hmm.
whatsoever. So I started off doing white magic. And that's definitely one of the ways that they softly trick you into doing it is that you're doing white magic or light magic and that it's not bad. And you can even be a Christian and do light magic because you're only using it for good. And I fell for that hard. So
Hmm.
I wasn't identifying with Christianity. In fact, I was upset with God because within that time frame that I was also with the Jehovah's Witnesses, my grandfather passed away. And so all of that mixed together, I was mad at God. I was put off because of the issue with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I found something that at the time made me feel good because all I was doing was thinking about what I needed, what I wanted, what would make me feel better. And I decided that it was witchcraft. So I spent hundreds of dollars and I made an altar and I bought herbs and I got candles of every different color and I just fell into it. I started doing self love spells. I started doing love spells on other people, which is terrible and just so demonic now that I'm looking back on it. I'm doing spells that I'm not talking to anyone about and directly affecting another person against their will. Complete manipulation. It
Hmm.
it's almost like I feel embarrassed. I feel cringe talking about the things that I did now. But this was the path that I was down because I was so angry and hurt and sad. And that's when the devil swoops in.
Hmm.
It is when you're down.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, first of all, actually, I wanted to say Job. Yeah, big props for Job. Big fan of Job. It's
Hmm.
quite a interesting book. I growing up reading Job, I always loved it because God spoke in it, and I just loved oh man, such a powerful book there. But and now that I'm older and learning more, there's a lot to plumb the depths of Job, which is really cool too. When you were at the grocery store and the cashier had made that comment to you about your grandmother, was your grandmother a believer? What was the impetus behind her making that comment?
Oh, sure. Well, I had through this process explained because even with my faith now, I'm the only person in my family who has faith. And my grandparents are both 100% Jewish. So I had told them that because part of the practice of being a Jehovah's Witness is divulging so much personal information. So pretty much everybody at that specific congregation that we went to on the west side of my town, they all knew everyone's business. So they knew that my
Hmm.
grandparents were Jewish and that I was the only person who was following.
So the comment was basically, because it almost seems very childish to make a comment like that. You know what I mean? As
Yes.
opposed to, as opposed to, I would love to see your grandmother in heaven with us, or I
Mhm.
would love, like something like, I mean, it just seems childish to me to say like, oh, well, you're going to see me, but you're not going to see your grandma. Is like, wait, like what? Why would you
That
say
was
something like that? That's
yeah,
awful.
that was kind of the issue that I had that started making me I mean, the issue of that comment and my grandfather at the same time was already a combo, but there were other things before that, like how, um, they pretty much treated it like a clique. So if you're in, and if you're not, you're just very ignorant and you should be begging to join us. And you're wrong about everything, and everything that you're doing is bad, and you can't watch these movies, you can't watch these shows, you should hang out with your family less, you can't celebrate your birthday, you you just shouldn't do any of these things, and if you do these things, we're going to make you feel really bad about it until you stop.
Hmm,
So, unfortunately, that kind of aligned with what I was seeing. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
sure. Um, so after that, what was the transition to witchcraft like? I mean, even we'll say white witchcraft, which obviously witchcraft is witchcraft in my mind, but
Mhm.
but what was the motivation behind? Okay, now not only am I not interested in Christianity or Jehovah's Witness stuff specifically, but I'm going to pivot into witchcraft. Like, was there a draw? Was there something from things you'd learned in the past that had taken you in that direction?
So I I do attribute some of it to media growing up. Some of the most culturally pivotal films for myself growing up with my age range was Halloween Town and The Craft. And when I
Hmm,
tell you that I used to watch The Craft like once a month, that was my favorite movie. And
hmm.
honestly, I think I might have been watching it one day when I thought, oh, they're able to alter their reality of their own power. And I'm feeling powerless right now and vulnerable. So I'm going to do that.
The idea that like you said, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm feeling powerless, and here I see people who are resilient and look very powerful, very sure in the way that they're walking. And obviously taking the fact that it's a movie, but that particular film I know a little bit about, The Craft, where that was all rooted in a real, mostly real approach to what witchcraft looked like or looks
Yep.
like. And even some of the cast in the film are practicing, even to this day, practicing witches. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that I see a lot of is a lot of people who are saying I feel powerless, or I feel some sort of thing that they would take as a deficit, or maybe as we'll just say like kind of an obvious negative in their life, and it's like, well, how do I regain power? How do I regain or reclaim whatever it is? And even some of the spells that you touched on, love spells, self love spells, things like that, like those are um all things that would kind of bolster a person to feel like like a lot of people struggle with being loving towards themselves, right? Or having having feelings of loneliness or doubt, or like all of these things that are very natural human feelings, right? And if we feel like we can kind of grab the reins, so to speak, why wouldn't we? If
Hmm.
all I have to do is buy a couple candles, or buy a tarot deck, or if it's it's interesting how or an altar, building an altar is, I mean, that seems like an extreme thing to do, but it's a couple $100, like you said. You spent your money, you invested in it, where it's like, well, if I can feel however I want to feel about myself and the world around me. And if I can do something to change the current, right? If I can do something to stop the tide,
Yep.
then couple $100 is nothing. Right. That's not anything at all. I did want to ask though. So obviously media plays a huge role. Halloween Town, I think is amazing. I know there are a lot of people who from movies that I'm going to assume were innocently made, right? Like Halloween Town.
Yes.
Maybe not. I don't know all the ins and outs of the making of that, but there are a lot of people who take more out of that than was probably put in for that movie. Now, The Craft maybe is a little bit different because they were trying to be very, as Hollywood allow, accurate to what witchcraft can look like and portray and that sort of thing. But it's interesting to see how that can really play on somebody, or I'll say maybe prey on somebody who is
Mm-hmm.
feeling a certain way, and then it's like, well, hey, I've got the answer for you. I mean, it's almost like the Old West story of like meeting the devil at the crossroads. He's got the contract out and ready. It's like, well, what do you want? And you just like sign right here. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's like, well, if you're feeling this way or that way, then I got the answer for you. You had talked about some of the spells that you were making, or I don't really know. I don't know if it's making spells or casting or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
proper terminology is. What is so a love spell, I understand. Like making spells to work against other people, I understand. I've not heard of a self-love spell specifically. What was that? The intent behind, what is the intent in general, I guess, behind a self-love spell?
Well, a self-love spell, from what I understood, is if you are feeling that emptiness in yourself, that, you know, God should fill. But I didn't know that at the time. If you're
Mm,
feeling that loneliness, that emptiness where you're not worth anything, or you're not good enough, or you can't be loved, it's essentially a spell to take those thoughts from your mind. And
mm,
it what you could do them in spell jars were really popular at the time. So you would put in your letter of intention, specific herbs, and then a correlating color candle to seal the jar with wax. And
mm.
that was your jar. And then if you ever were having those feelings again, then you would go and you would like meditate and hold your jar. And I don't mean to say it like it's so stupid, but it is so stupid. I was trying to get fulfillment in my heart from a jar.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I understand the sentiment of what you're saying. It feels so stupid now to look back on it, and I know exactly what you're saying. But to me, it's interesting how storied that sort of thing is. Like as you read through the Bible, especially I believe in Jeremiah, I recall this whole thing of God just coming down on Israelites, and it's like, you see the guy who chops the wood down, who fashions it into an idol, who brings it into your house, yet you still put everything in. You believe in this idol. You believe that some pagan god you serve enters this hunk of wood that you watched him chop down.
Mhm.
And it's the same sort of approach here. It's interesting how, I want to say, how human of a thing it is to want to have something that we can hold and see, touch,
Yes.
taste, feel. And God in the whole Old Testament is like, I don't want you to know what I look like,
Mhm.
because I don't want you to make something that looks like me, that you think looks like me, and then start to worship that thing. And it's like, and the Israelites throughout the whole Old Testament, that's all they were trying to do. I even think about the fact that like when Moses spoke with God on Mount Sinai, God appeared as a great cloud. It's like, I don't want you to be able to replicate. Can you make a cloud out of a log? No. Like, can you make a cloud out of gold? No. So they went back to the thing they remembered worshiping before God, right? They made the golden calf and all this sort of thing. And it's just I love how intentional God is with that, because he knows our human nature is to want to find a thing to hold, a token or talisman to rub, a something to keep in our pocket, to, the candles, the intent behind the jar matters, right? It's not that you have a jar, but it's what's in the jar, how the jar was sealed, what went into, you know what I'm saying? So like,
Yes.
so yes, there is this element, and I think we can all kind of distance ourselves and say, yes, this is stupid. But at the very same time, we all have or have had something like that. We may not have been so intentional in the creation of it, but we all have something that we have wanted to put all our hopes into, or all our intentions into. So and I guess the reason that I bring that up is just because of the idea that everything in the supernatural world that is in opposition to God can't make anything on their own. So all they can do is try to take from what God has made and try to usurp it in some way. And one thing I've thought about in the past about like people who like worship the universe, or who worship all these things, it's like you're just 1 degree away from worshiping the creator of the universe. You're just 1 degree away of worshiping the creator of the nature around you. You're just 1 degree away, but that 1 degree is the difference between true life and true death. And that is what's so disheartening about the human nature of these sorts of things, where it's like, there is someone who made those herbs. There is someone who caused those things to come into reality and existence, right? There's a reason that those things exist. And so everything in opposition to God is kind of like, yes, why don't you take these things that God has made? Nature has made. And, and spin all these things so that we have to have a thing to worship, instead of an eternal being to know who is in control. And because all the things you're talking about, right? Which actually, and I don't mean to go on, but this actually just occurred to me. I think this is so interesting. When we are feeling those feelings, very real, honest human feelings, we've all felt not good enough, not whatever enough it is, right? My beard is never as thick as I want it to be. I mean, like, just all the things that we can think about. And God says to us, give those things to me. And in a very real way, you go, or I can put them in a jar and keep them for when I need it at a later time to put more, you know what I'm saying? Like it seems so intentional, the way that the witchcraft is supposed to work. And it's like, oh, give them to a creator. Just put them in a jar. It's fine. Keep the jar. Hold on to the jar. You may need it some other time. That's so interesting to me to think that, God is like, give them to me. And witchcraft says, put them away. Put them in because ultimately they're still all around you. Like, they're in the individual jars. They're still there. And, is the idea behind the jar specifically, is that all the feelings, like, are you adding to the jar at all? Or is it like you seal it in the jar and then you just leave it? Or like, what ultimately do you do with the jar? You just hold it forever?
So the thought process behind using the jar specifically, once you seal it, it's sealed. So the idea is that you are supposed to draw intention, and like, there was a whole process of specifically meditating, and I will never forget this. The process that I had learned over time with the research that I was doing was that you stand before your altar with all of your materials and your tools, and you meditate and you imagine the energy in your body, and you can imagine it in whatever color you wish. And you take all of that energy and you, in your mind, circulate it from the top of your head all the way down to the bottom of your feet. And then it needs to go in the earth so that the energy of the earth can connect with your energy. And then you bring it back up so you have enough for whatever spell you're doing, because it was advised that when you are putting these jars together or spell casting, that you have to draw energy from the earth, because if you don't, you will literally feel exhausted and maybe even faint after you're done completing your spell, which should have been a huge red flag.
Hmm.
But the jar, the spell jar, the idea is that you put all of that energy and intention in it and you seal it. And if you don't need it anymore, then you open it.
Interesting. So you hold on to it
Mhm.
regardless. I mean, whether you may need it or not at some other time. Now, when you say, actually, this is interesting. When you say that you may need it from the jar, are you specifically saying for yourself or for spell work against other people or for other people, I suppose?
It's both. So if I were
Hmm.
making a jar specifically for my self-worth, that's when I'd grab for it. I used to make jars for self-love. I had a jar for when I felt tired. I have had a jar for when I had bad dreams, when I needed more energy. I had a jar for um, keeping out people praying for me, so that their prayers would not reach me, so that I could continue using my own energy. Because the thought process, once I got deeper, this was when I got way deep into it, not at the beginning, but as I
Hmm.
developed, um, and this is how easy it is to slip into it. And this is why I will never listen to someone tell me that you can do witchcraft and be Christian, because I know for myself that it's completely demonic. There is, as you go into looking at the roots of research, because eventually, as a witch, you get curious as to where this all comes from. And when you look through pagan literature, it encourages you to look at paganism as the original religion. And it's not even a religion, it's like a relationship. And the relationship, spoiler alert, is with Satan. Um,
Hmm.
they tell you that Christianity was developed from paganism, and
Hmm.
that those poor pagans got trampled over by all of these Christians building their churches, and everything relating to the Bible is from paganism, and the true creator is Satan. I
Hmm.
actually read that in a book. And
Yeah.
there, and it's kind of a side note, kind of a big side note, but there are performances or spells or rituals, would be the right word, that you can do that I feel directly mock God. I'm not going to say the name of the book, because I hope and I pray with every fiber of my being, every bit of my soul, every bone in my body, that nobody ever performs it or ever finds this book. But when I was really, really into it, I performed a ritual where you essentially denounce God and try to cross over into the spiritual realm and reward yourself for tying yourself to Satan by drinking wine and eating bread.
Hmm.
And that can't be any more clear to me personally.
It's interesting now, and you've alluded to this already. I mean, everything that witchcraft portrays itself to be is really just honoring Satan, is really just worshiping paganism, is just worshiping whatever is what I like to say is whatever is opposed to God, right?
Yes.
Whatever is in opposition to God. That's really what it is. And if somebody when you were contemplating, maybe I should try out witchcraft, and you hop onto Witch Talk, and the very first one you see is the one that's like, oh, by the way, do this ritual, tie yourself to Satan, drink wine, and eat some bread. I think that the numbers for witchcraft would substantially plummet.
Yes.
But for those who have walked in witchcraft for a long time, you said you were in it for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are walking in witchcraft for a long time and are continuing to see successes with the witchcraft, right? Then at some point, you're like, well, maybe that's not a bad idea after all.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen so many successes. The jars, you wouldn't make jars for all the things that you listed if they didn't do anything for you, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you had said there were a few spells you were using against, or I don't know if necessarily said against or for, but on someone who was near to you. And again, they must have been having some sort of success. When you're practicing witchcraft, would you say for the 10 years you would still label yourself as a white witch, or would you say that maybe that, and I don't know how witchcraft works necessarily, but like at some point, do you cross the line to being a different type of witch? I've heard from different people who I've talked to that there is different types of witchcraft. What would you say you kind of ended up as before you ultimately left witchcraft?
Yes. So, and again, it's all branded to make you feel good about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, your zodiac sign says this about you. They made it all very brand friendly. So there were dozens of different types of witches that you could be. You could be a white witch, a black witch, a red witch, a yellow witch, a green witch. And then they had other different variations where you were a witch that focused specifically on like love spells only. So you were a love witch. I labeled myself as an eclectic witch. So I did light magic, I did dark magic. Um, right before I stopped, I even did blood magic, which is like the big no-no. Even in the witchcraft community, they say, do this at your own risk because this is what's dangerous.
Hmm.
And I did even that.
When you say you did blood magic, and I don't know how much you want to go into it or not, it's certainly up to you, but what is that? How about we start here? What exactly is the purpose for blood magic?
Sure. So if you're doing a spell, especially if you're doing it over and over again and you're following all the instructions. And if you have any other questions after I tell you this part, please ask because it starts to get a little complicated. They, with the research that is out there to anyone, unfortunately, you can have a spell not work for several reasons. It could be that you weren't using enough herbs. Maybe you didn't meditate enough. Maybe you were doing it on the wrong moon cycle. Maybe you need to do it on a certain day or at a certain time that aligns with your astrological star sign. Or if you really want an extra kick in your spell to have it work no matter what, then you do blood magic. Because blood magic, especially connected with your blood, is supposed to be like it takes your intent and it sets it on fire. So it's like your intent times 10. So if you use your blood, then it's got to work. But it's dangerous because using your blood invites the devil in directly. And I never really understood exactly how all of that worked and why that was the link. But I did it and it definitely worked for what I was trying to do at the time. But it also definitely, I feel like, cost me as well. Because the other thing that I wanted to comment on when you were talking earlier about how, I wouldn't have been continuing to do it if it wasn't working. What I didn't realize is that it was working because I was inviting in a little bit of good and a lot of bit of bad. So, I would make another thing that people will do in witchcraft is make money bowls, where you take a bowl and you do a base of salt. And then you put in whatever herbs align with your intention, which for money was usually bay leaves, and you would write, what you wanted money wise on bay leaves and put it in the bowl. I would invite in money with a money bowl, and then, I would find $20 on the street the next day, like, oh my gosh, this is working. This is so
Hmm.
great. And then a week after that, I would have car problems and I would have to spend $400 on new brakes that I thought were fine. So I was
Hmm.
essentially tricking myself into thinking that I was doing something good and almost ignoring all of the bad that I was inviting in, because that wasn't my intent and that's not what I was focusing on. So that just must be life. That must be life, that I'm having all of these financial problems and I'm the most depressed that I've ever been in my life. And I'm on all of these different medications for my anxiety and my depression, and my relationships are all going south. It must just be life. And it definitely wasn't life. I mean, even now, I don't think that I was ever as sick as I was when I was doing witchcraft. I had the most health problems at that time.
Interesting. Interesting. Again, though, if you see a little success, it covers over a whole lot of failure sometimes.
Hmm.
Oh, I mean, so what would you say now? I know that you had mentioned, like, okay, what about the blood sets this off, right? What would you say now? Like, why do you think that for some reason, adding blood to a spell or to an intention sets it off? Like, what about that does that in witchcraft?
So, in witchcraft, now that I know what I know, it was all about connecting to Satan, whether you know that's what you're doing or not. Um, the color red is very deeply rooted in Satanism. In that ritual that I did, I had to tie specific knots with all of the chakra points of my body, and it was all with one red ribbon that I needed to carry around after the ritual was done.
Hmm.
And the color red and involving blood was all part of it. I never actually did it, but using a prick of blood was part of that ritual. I just wasn't comfortable with it at the time, and I'm so glad that I didn't. But it's very significant because it's something within your body that you should not give, that almost gives the devil access into you.
Hmm.
And that's why I think that even in witchcraft, it's recommended that you don't, because I think that even if you're doing something that goes against God, most people don't know that they're going against God by doing witchcraft. The only people I think who should know better are the subsection of communities of Christian witches. I feel like they should know better at that point. Um,
Hmm.
but for me, I had no clue before I started getting into it. And I just thought that the color red was representative of passion and power. And that's why it was so tied into it.
Hmm. Well, and it's interesting because the notion of a Christian witch, I have to believe is a fairly new notion, and I could be wrong there, but I've heard arguments from those who are walking that path where they're like, well, The witches of biblical times, the only things they did were spells against other people and intended to harm other people and were doing a certain type of witchcraft that isn't what we do. And kind of how you touched on, like, you were a white witch. So
Mm-hmm.
the magic that you were doing, you would categorize that as good. And
Mm-hmm.
so, those who are practicing Christian witches, they wouldn't take kind of that Greek word pharmakeia and equate it, which is how we translate witchcraft a lot now. They wouldn't equate that to what they're doing. They would say, "Oh, no, that's only bad witchcraft."
Mm-hmm.
And I just, it's, I think the challenge is then at some point you have to, and for me, I actually like these conversations, but there are a lot of people I think who don't like these conversations, because then you have to think about things that you assume you knew already anyway. But then you
Mm-hmm.
have to really think about, well, what is actually good? And so as a white witch, I'm only doing good magic, or I'm only doing good towards other people, or I'm only putting good intentions into the things that I do. Well, what is good? What does good mean? And I mean, to me, ultimately, I'll cut to the chase. We know that, as Jesus said, only God is good.
Yes.
So what about any of the witchcraft that you do can be any better than who God is? And if you were to follow the Bible, the Christian part of the Christian witchcraft that you say that you're following, well, the
Mm-hmm.
Bible says, cast all your cares on God. Ask God, and like, ask God, invite him into all the spaces, right? So to me, even if there were some sort of world in which witchcraft and Christianity could merge, witchcraft would inevitably have to be forced out, because God doesn't leave any room for anything else. It's like, if I can pray and ask God, why do I need to cast a spell? Why do I need to put intent into sage or into herbs or into a candle or into, when God has never asked you to do any of those things? So
Mm-hmm.
so to me, it's just kind of like you're trying to pair two things that have never asked to be together. You know what I mean? Or at least not from the Christian side.
Mm-hmm.
But so I've heard from some people who I've talked to, uh things about, ultimately you find that you're serving Satan, or you're doing something for the devil. And you had even alluded to, like, there are at least some witches who know really what this is all about, or what this looks like, especially in terms of blood magic, right? Like what this looks like, what this leads to. While at the same time, the idea behind witchcraft is there's kind of, you can pull from anything and everything if it's effective, if it works, if there's some sort of, significance there. So, like, what do you think a witch who is practicing now would say about the fact, like, there is a devil, or there is some sort of Satan-like figure that we can kind of find ourselves in service to? Like, is that a commonly held belief, or is there, kind of like you were saying, only a specific kind of sect of witches that may acknowledge that, or what does that look like?
So, because witchcraft isn't considered a religion, it's considered part of nature, you can align yourself with anything. I have seen, and you can look it up on TikTok, you can look up like, if you just look up Christian witch, there are women who will still have their altar and practice witchcraft and dedicate their altar to Jesus. You can also dedicate it to nature. So instead of having a small statue of Jesus or Satan or Aphrodite or whatever, you could have a jar of dirt. And you could say, I'm going to worship this jar of dirt because this is the essence of nature. And I want to practice witchcraft that helps heal the earth from dying and make all the plants grow. And you can literally dedicate it to anything.
It's interesting because, and I know I'd kind of touched on this before, witchcraft to me seems to get it so close to being right, but so far off, right? That 1 degree, because, like, that jar of dirt, for example, we don't worship the dirt, but the God who made the dirt, oh, we
Mm-hmm.
should definitely worship that. that being, right? We should worship whoever that is, or whatever that is, right? And so um that's the thing that I find so fascinating. And I think that maybe there are some other kind of threads we can say is like, there are people who, like, if they're 95% right but 5% wrong, they're still gonna focus on that 95%. And so
Mm-hmm.
those witches who know that using blood for magic or ritual crosses a certain threshold, they're not saying don't cross it, but they're just saying, look, we know that this is not probably the wisest path to take for most people. But as a practicing witch, you're like, but if I want this to work, I know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a Christian, blood is all over the Old and New Testament, and it holds a lot of significance. And so for a person who's practicing witchcraft to say that, using blood matters, I think that that's something that is so storied throughout all of history, all of recorded history that we can know about. There is something unique and different and special about blood. And like, even in the old Levitical laws, where it's like, even if a woman is menstruating, like, okay, the liquids that are in her body are coming out of her body, and that's not how it's supposed to be. So she needs to be away from the camp, because that's not how our body is, like all these sorts of things where it's like, even back then in the early Israelite camp, they're like, this is not a normal, same for a man. If liquids are coming out of his body that are not normally supposed to be coming out of his body, he's got to, the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We recognize, and as you said too, like, there are parts of your body that you can intend and dedicate to the spell work that you're using, blood, for example, being one of them. I'm sure there are lots of other things that you could probably use to hype up or enhance or, do for spell work that are commonly done by a lot of people. It's like, we all know that there's something special, something unique about blood in its nature, and what blood serves, what purpose blood serves. Even if we can't necessarily explain why it does what it does, we still have an idea of what it does, right? If
Mm-hmm.
your body is missing all its blood, then you're not walking around anymore. That's just, and they've known, and we've known since the beginning of creation, that that's just kind of how it is. You need to keep the blood inside.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Christian, to hear things about blood magic, again, it just makes me feel like you are so close. If only you knew it wasn't your blood that could do all the things that you're hoping these spells are going to do for you, or the intent that goes behind them. Like, your blood plays a part in that, but somebody already shed their blood for you, so you can go to them for whatever it is that you need, for whatever it is that's going on. For that $20 that you need on this, that you find on the side of the road, you don't need the salt, you don't need the bowl, you don't need the bay leaves, you don't need the, like, Jesus is like, don't you know that God provides for the birds of the field? Like, he's going to provide for you. He's going to take care of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things that I think has rang so true for witchcraft in the people who I've interviewed and talked to about this, where there's this element of, I need to take care of myself. I need to kind of take myself up by my bootstraps and do what I can do, as opposed to trusting God for those sorts of things, right? Like, the feelings that I'm feeling, the thoughts that I'm thinking, the things that I want, the medications, the mental health, all these things. That this is not to say, medication is evil or whatever, but it's this idea of, like, who holds the reins. And humans always want to hold the reins. We always want to be in control. We always want to steer. We always want to guide. We always want to. And like I'd kind of touched on before, it's such a human thing. I should be old enough to know what I need, and I should be able to know how to take care of myself. And I should, these sorts of things where it's like, even kids, when kids are old enough and they think they know enough, that's when they typically make the worst mistakes because they thought they knew what they were doing, you know?
Mhm.
Again, I just find that with witchcraft that it is that mentality of like, I know what I can do. And it's interesting to say like there is no book, there is no specific guide there, but at the same time, that means that kind of everything and anything can be an option because if it works for you, then it's the right thing. And
Mhm.
it's again, like we'd kind of talked about earlier on, but there is no foothold. So if there is no foothold, then really even something that you find, it can't be a foundation for you because it may not be the most true thing. Like you may find a spell that works for you and then all of a sudden it stops working. And if you're not interested in going down the route of using blood or anything like that, well then, oh, well, this person said this spell works and it does the same thing this one does. And maybe that's a more powerful, and you could just kind of chase your tail the
Yep.
whole time, you know? We've been talking about your 10 years of witchcraft, and I don't want to leave this time if there's some more things that you want to talk about in that time, but if you're ready to move on from that, I would love to know at what point do you say, but God, but
Yes.
Jesus, what does that look like?
So before I actually reached that point, God had stepped in. After I did that ritual that we were talking about, at that point, I do honestly truly believe that God stepped in and said, we got to stop that. And my spells stopped working. I started feeling sick. I started feeling even more depressed than I had in a really long time. And I stepped away from witchcraft. And at the time, I had looked it up, and it was common to have like a witchcraft block where you need to step away from it for a few days, few months, few years. And then you can come back to it whenever because it's not, it's not religion, it's nature, and nature is always there. So you can always go back.
Hmm,
And I never did. Thank goodness. And
hmm,
I remember when I found out that I was pregnant. It was not planned. And I remember thinking to myself, there's no way that I can give up this child. And right then, I remember actually talking to God for the first time in a really long time. And it was kind of like a, like, show me that you're here moment.
hmm,
And it was like a small seed that I planted. And I said to God, if you're real, please give me a healthy baby boy that has my husband's ears and my husband's really long eyelashes
hmm,
and my nose. I was being really specific and I was thinking like this can't be fulfilled. I think
hmm,
that, after Aurelius is born, then maybe I'll just get back to it because pregnancy and witchcraft can be a little bit controversial because you're so delicate at that time
hmm,
that I just didn't. And then my son was born with my husband's long eyelashes, my husband's big booty earlobes that I love to pull, and my
hmm,
nose. And the first few weeks after he was born, I was going through postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, but
hmm,
I was just weeping every day, day in and day out, because I mourned how much time I had wasted. And I knew that God was real, that I wasted the last 10 years of my life dedicating it to something that he could not be more unhappy with. And
hmm,
sorry, I'm trying to like keep it together. um,
yeah.
and I just cried and I cried out and I apologized. And I got so worked up that I was just sitting, rocking back and forth, saying, Jesus, I'm sorry, Jesus, I'm sorry, Jesus, I'm sorry.
Hmm,
And I felt him hug me. and tell me it was okay. And I felt this conviction to say out loud, Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And from that moment on, my life has been so good. I don't even think that I could deserve to be this happy. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
But I mean, it's true. It's all true. And I just really hope that people can experience his love and his grace and his glory the way I have, because it's all true. And like, it's hard to understand that until you experience it for yourself. But like,
Hmm.
I mean, even in it's like in Psalms 113 verse 9, he settles the childless woman in her home as a happy mother of children. And I am a happy mother. And he fulfilled that for me. And he gave that to me. And not only do I have a happy, healthy baby boy, but I feel like there's this hole in my heart that's been fulfilled, that I found my purpose in life, that I'm not lost, that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And it is so good.
Hmm. Amen. Yeah, God has a way. God has a way about himself to reach us in exactly the way and time that we need. And it is interesting to think that, after 10 years, you're like, well, what have I been doing with these 10 years? These 10 years have been, wasted. But I pray, first of all, I know that you'd kind of you've alluded to it kind of prior to the time that God had kind of been watching you and guiding you and pulling you the whole time. Um, so I'm sure he didn't wait 10 years to finally say, by the way, if you wouldn't be so kind as to look to me for all these things.
Yes.
Probably before those 10 years, I imagine. But I'll tell you that because you walked those 10 years, the way that you walked those 10 years, anybody you run into who's been into it for any number of years now has a resource to guide them to ultimate truth,
Amen.
to the ultimate blood magic, if you will. And
Yes.
I don't mean to say that Jesus is magic, but like, we understand that there is a reason that his shed blood is so important for us as Christians. And so I pray that God takes those 10 years and uses you to glorify him because of the knowledge you have of those things. And I trust that he will not waste a single day of those 10 years of your experience. I trust that for sure. Um, if someone is deep into magic, they are an eclectic witch, but for some reason they step foot into a church and we'll just say, just a random Sunday morning, they come into church, people are greeting them, whatever it is, and somehow it slips out, oh, actually, I'm a practicing witch. What would your hope be for the church, like, to respond to this person who comes into church?
I would say that it would be so helpful to just talk to them like a person. Talk to them with that grace and that understanding that we are taught to live by every day. Maybe not try to shun them for it, but show them that the love that they can receive from the community of their church, the understanding of the path that they've gone through, that it's real, that it's not made up, that they're not crazy, but that they're maybe misled and that they can find better with the church, and just embrace them. Don't judge them harshly, but just embrace them so that they want to come back and that they understand that the love that they can receive from their faith and from God is greater than what they're receiving, now. That 25% can be 100.
Hmm. Yeah. Treat them like humans.
Pretty much.
Treat them when I say human, I guess the only reason I kind of want to expound on this a little bit, because it's simple to say treat somebody like a human, but what I really mean to say is treat them as someone who is created in the image of God, and train them to be an imager of God, like we are called to be. And I think that when somebody comes into church, and treat them with respect, be gracious and gentle to them. When you're walking in darkness for long enough and you finally get exposed to the light, you don't really realize the darkness you were walking in, right? Until that moment comes. And so there are a lot of people who, like you had mentioned, are practicing Christian witches. And they think that because we can fold everything into witchcraft, because it's just it's a natural thing, right? We're tapping into nature, that we can kind of tap into everything and anything. And sure, Jesus was a natural man, but he was also God, right? So to have that
Yep.
altar to Jesus, you know, it's interesting to again, like I know I kind of use this phrase a lot this episode, but to say that that person is just 1 degree off, it's like, we don't need to make an altar to Jesus. He actually makes an altar out of us. Like
Mhm.
we are able to bow the knee to Jesus within ourselves, because he dwells within us through his Holy Spirit. I love that. I appreciate your wisdom on that, because it is one thing to say somebody comes to the church and is like, I'm a witch. And it can be very easy for the church to be like, oh, well, why don't you sit over there right next to nobody else? And
Mhm.
we'll all sit on this side, and it's okay. And we'll get the pastor for you. And, nobody will talk like, the pastor doesn't, I mean, I'm sure it'd be great to have the pastor involved, but like, we're all Christians. We all have the Holy Spirit dwelling within us, and should be empowered and emboldened by the Holy Spirit, right? To sit next to that person, and to come alongside that person, right? To just treat them with the utmost respect as a fellow imager, as a fellow person who's created in the image of God, right?
Yes.
Um, Zhané, I really, really appreciate the time that you've spent with me today, and I have a hunch that you probably have a lot more wisdom to share that we have not had time to share today. Um, I would love for anybody who is either in the same situation you were in, where they're a white witch practicing white witch, or an eclectic witch, we'll say, practicing, if they have more questions for you, or even Christians who are listening who are like wanting to know, a little bit more about your story, is there anywhere that they can find you online?
Yes. Please reach out to me on TikTok, DM me. Information should be listed. And if you have any questions or want to share your story, relate. I've even through my process of just posting on TikTok, I've already made a friend who was also in witchcraft for several years and has now turned her life over to God. And I love that. I would love to have a community of men and women who have been able to turn their lives around, because I feel like we would all understand each other so well and be able to uplift each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just thank you so much for your time and your willingness to be on Martyria. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was so wonderful.